So we'll get to full screen. Here we go. So if one person, Joran, could you just write that it is full screen and you can see me properly now? I believe it is. Someone is asking me if it's suitable to have kids on the webinar. Yeah, it's fine. I will keep it PG. Okay, we're on. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to my home here in Byron Bay. My name is Dr Arne Rubinstein, and I am the CEO of the Rites of Passage Institute. And we've been working for 25 years in Australia and around the world to create rites of passage for families and communities and people of all different ages. And now in this time of the global pandemic, we've taken our work online and trying to do everything we can to support you and your families. And so we've been running this series of webinars on parenting in a time of crisis. And before we get going, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land. We are on the land of the Bundjalung people from the Bundjalung Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging of this country. So thank you everyone for joining from all over Australia and from all over the world. It's tremendous. I would start with one of my golden check-ins. So we've been putting out this idea of doing a check-in, but people have been asking, well, what do you do in a check-in? And so we use the word golden, G-O-L-D-E-N. G stands for how am I going? O for what have I been occupied with and doing? L, what have I liked? D, what's been difficult? What am I excited about is E, and N, what do I need? So how am I going? I'm going pretty well, but I have to say there's a lot of ups and downs at the moment. There are some really good things happening, and there are some things that are very worrying at the same time. So I couldn't just give a simple answer to that. There's a lot going on. What have I been occupied with and doing? Well, I've been home most of the time. A lot of our energy is in fact gone into creating these online courses, particularly our 7-part course for parents and children to do together at home. We really wanted to get it done by the school holidays because we recognize that school have been providing a lot of information and time for the children doing their online work, but now we come to school holidays and that just stops. So we wanted to have something there really practical and for children and parents to do together. So that's taken a lot of time and energy to do that. What have I liked? I've liked being at home. I love my home. I love my land. I built a veggie patch this week and put the first seedlings in today. I've really liked that. I've got a lot of joy out of that. What's been difficult? Well, there are currently 4 of us living in a small space, using it as a co-working space, and we all have loud voices. And, you know, there's been some difficulties in that. And it's interesting because a lot of people I've been hearing from around the community have been saying, well, we've been home for like a week, 10 days, and I'm really struggling. And so, you know, I noticed that I'm not alone in this. There are elements of that have been difficult, and I'd like to speak to that tonight. What I'm excited about, I'm excited that Easter is coming up, and we've made a decision here in the house that we're all going to basically stop working for 4 days and see how creative we can get about what we can do at home and how we can spend our time well in these next 4 days. And what do I need? I don't feel I need a lot. Actually, there are things I want, but there's not a lot I need. I think I'm in a pretty good place with my family, people I love, and I have the things I need. I have food, I have safety, I have space. So for now, there's nothing that I feel I actually need, and I'm happy to be able to say that. Okay, so tonight we want to look more at rites of passage and how the COVID-19 pandemic is actually a rite of passage. I'm going to talk about that quite a bit. We're going to give you some practical tools and tips that you can do with your children and in very much with yourselves that will be supportive for you. And also we're going to talk about some of the things that are going on in the community, how we manage those, or how we look at those. And finally, some of the things that we can offer you from the Rites of Passage Institute. And a number of people have already asked tonight if we can tell you more about our online course for parents and children that you can do at home and with the school holidays coming up. So let's jump into this idea of a rite of passage. And I have to say, as these webinars go along, yes, I will give you tips and ideas and things that I've learned. I don't actually consider myself to be a parenting expert. What I consider myself to be is reasonably well educated in rites of passage and understanding about rites of passage. I actually want to start off with a story, and it's a personal story. So my first career was as a medical doctor, and I did a few years in family medicine. I was a general practitioner, and then I worked in emergency medicine for over 15 years. And a lot of my work in emergency medicine was in small country hospitals. And the thing with being in a small country hospital is often it's one doctor and one or two nurses. And the nurse would often be a very, an older and very experienced nurse who'd been around a long time and seen pretty much everything, and maybe a student nurse. And sometimes it was just me and the student nurse. And the thing about working in those situations is there were a lot of things that came in that were quite small and simple, but we would also regularly get extremely serious situations where someone had been in a farm accident and had been run over by a tractor, or a chainsaw had done terrible things to some part of them, or a woman who was having a miscarriage and bleeding to death, or a baby who they'd pulled out of a dam, things like that. And the thing that really I learned in those situations was about how to deal with scenarios that I had never been in before and where I was out of control. How to do things that, I'd never done. And that were very important things. They were life and death things. And there was a number of times where the person I was dealing with, the patient I was dealing with, was either a friend of mine or the parent of a friend of mine or the son or daughter of a friend of mine. So there were a lot of implications around the importance of getting it right and doing what needed to be done. And the thing in emergency medicine is there is this assumption that you know the basics, you know how to look after the normal things, but a lot of our training was around being able to deal with these situations that you'd never been in before. And in fact, I used to do scenario training regularly as part of my professional development, where I would go to the big hospitals and they would have a setup with the emergency medicine doctors there, and they would create these scenarios, a bit like a pilot being in a, what's it called when you're in a cockpit that's not a real cockpit, a flight simulator. So they would put us in a simulator and they'd set up a situation and they'd have an artificial, a patient, and they would keep on making the situation more and more difficult until you were out of control. And the scenario did not actually start until you were out of control, because they were training us to be able to deal with being out of control. And what I learned from that is that when I would be in emergency and something would, an ambulance would bring someone in, or someone would just come running to the door and say, help, help, or they'd, a car would pull up or something like that. And I really learned that the most important thing was not to panic, and that I actually had to slow things down, and that I had to sort of move back and try and take in the whole situation, to look at not only the patient, but what was going on around and what was going on in the general area and who else was there. And I had to make sure that I was not in danger and that my team or whoever I was with was not in danger. And then I had to look and see, how could I get help and support in this scenario? So could we get someone on the phone who could get through to one of the base hospitals and someone there who could help us? And so it was really about going through in the most calm way possible, even when someone was dying, to try and do everything that we could to save this person. And we learned that there are a series of steps that you go through that gives you the greatest chance of being able to deal with the situation in the best way possible. Now, in many ways, we are actually in a similar situation. I strongly believe that we are in a rite of passage. This global pandemic is in fact a rite of passage. It's a rite of passage for our children, ourselves, our families, our communities, and the world. And a rite of passage is a transformational event. It's something that changes us, and we are never the same again. And for me, there is no doubt that we will not be the same after this. And the thing that changes in a rite of passage is, in fact, our core set of beliefs and our values and our understanding of the world. Now, if we can understand the elements that are happening and the stages of a rite of passage in the same way as by my understanding what was going on when an emergency came into the hospital I was working with and how to deal with it, we can use a similar way of knowing how best to manage the rite of passage that is happening. Because the bottom line is we are going to change. The big question is, are we going to come out of this event better people? Are we going to come out closer to our families? Are we going to come out with a greater desire to live in community and to be good people? Or is this whole event going to be a dramatically wounding and disastrous experience for a lot of people and the world? And that is the big question for me. Are we going to manage what's happening well, or is it going to be managed really, really badly? And I want to come back for a moment to this idea that what changes is our core set of beliefs and our values, and talk about some of the beliefs that will be changing. And I might actually put on our slides now, and I'll just show you some of the steps of a rite of passage that we've looked at before. And I talk about this thing that life is a series of transformations. And there are the transformations that, we know about and we talk about, where we move from, we move from being a baby to being a child, a young adult, an adult in the community, an elder. So we have these we have these transformations, and at each of these stages in life, we have a different way of looking at life, and we have a different set of beliefs about what's important and who we are and our role in the community. But we also have other events which happen, like what's going on now, that will change us and move us to a different level. And some of the beliefs that are going to be changing for not only children, but for adults as well, are things like our certainty that the world and everything in it will always be the same. So most people, myself included, and certainly a lot of children, have believed until now that life is going to basically be about the same, and we will be okay, and things will be good, and we'll be looked after, and we'll be able to move through life, and nothing, really bad will ever happen to us. All of a sudden, in a short period of time, a lot of people have come to the realization that this world we live in is no longer there's no longer certainty that everything is always going to be all right forever. We are in a situation where we actually don't know what the future is going to be like. And whilst we hope that most of us will get through what's going on at the moment, this pandemic, we have to be worried for our elderly. And we don't know if there's going to be another pandemic after this. We actually don't know how this whole situation is going to play out. We don't know how long it's going to go for. So for, a lot of us, and, I've never been through a war. I've never been through a major depression, all of those things. So for a lot of people, our core belief that life is just going to go on and will always be okay has been significantly challenged. And when a core belief like that is challenged, that actually has a major impact on us. And if we think about our children who've always felt safe and secure, hopefully most of them because of what we've set up for them, for some of them, they will be feeling genuinely insecure about the future for the first time in their lives. And that therefore means that a belief system that they've had will be dying. There will be a level of death associated with the loss of some of our core beliefs. And with that death will come the 5 stages of mourning. So if a relative or someone close to us dies, it's well recognized that there are 5 stages of mourning. And the first is denial, and the second is bargaining. Then we have anger, depression, and finally acceptance. And there's no doubt that a lot of our children, and indeed ourselves, will be going through these stages. You know, a lot of people were in denial when this all started happening. And then people were trying to bargain and go, oh, you know, I can still go out to do such and such. And if I'm careful, I can go to dinner with a few people. And so there was all of that, the bargaining going on. And then people have become, you know, you will be seeing this in quite a few houses, I imagine, that there'll be anger. And then there may be depression about the fact, oh my God, I'm here for like maybe 12 weeks or more. And that's the worst thing in the world. And then finally there's acceptance. And when we move into acceptance, we go, okay, now I'm here and I'll stay here until the next stage. Some people will be in acceptance, but I suspect that a lot of people are still in those other stages. And we know, especially with children, that when they have internal issues going on, that it can often come out externally in unusual or inappropriate behaviors. So once again, if our children are acting out, if they are emotionally different from how we would like them to be, or if there are things that are going on, we really have to look at what's going on behind all of that and check in with them and give them an opportunity to share and express. And that's one of the reasons I've been really pushing people to have a regular check-in, to talk about what's going on and to be able to find a scenario to do it honestly. I'm going to talk briefly about a check-in that I had with my teenage stepson today, Saxon, because I've mentioned him in every other webinar, so I will mention him again tonight. And that is, you know, I become quite frustrated at times with Saxon because he doesn't really talk to me. And I'm like, hang on, you know, all of this is going on. We're looking after you and we're trying to do everything well for you, and you're not talking to me. And I really struggle with that. And Saxon, to his credit, was able to say in our check-in today that when he has a hard time, he will tend to go internally and quiet because he actually doesn't want to be rude or offend people or get angry. And, you know, what a beautiful insight to realize about yourself, that if things are not going well, that rather than taking it out on other people, you actually just go quiet. And he even apologized to me. And that was actually quite an extraordinary thing to have a 16-year-old teenager who I challenged him and said, look, I'm, you know, struggling with some of the behavior, say, hey, you know, I just want you to know I am going quiet because I have things going on for me and I don't want to be rude or give anyone a hard time or take my anger out on other people. But if we hadn't had a check-in, we wouldn't have known that. And I would have become more frustrated, and who knows what, you know, might have blown up into a big argument. So I cannot emphasize enough the importance of having regular check-ins within your family, giving people an opportunity to speak and just listen so that they can actually talk to you about what's going on. All right. So if we come back to our slides on the stages of a rite of passage, and, you know, we talked in our first couple of webinars about how it's a transformation and similar to a caterpillar going into a cocoon and becoming a butterfly, and that the first stage of the separation of the first stage of a rite of passage is in fact a separation. It's a separation from our normal lives. And we've all definitely, well and truly, been separating from our normal lives, some more than others. But, there's no doubt that these are not normal times anymore. And then we go into a container. And it is within this container that the transformation will happen. And for a caterpillar, the container is a cocoon. For many of us, our container is either our house, our place that we're in, but there's also like this whole big psychological container that's been set up in the world where we all know that we are in a different state than what we're normally in. And then within this container and within all rites of passage, there will be challenges. And challenges are an absolutely normal part of a rite of passage. In fact, what they say is there's a challenge or an ordeal. And, that challenge for many of us may have only just started. And we don't know what other challenges are going to come up during this time. And we don't know where those challenges are going to go. But we know, and we need to know, that there will be challenges in this container period. And once again, if we know that there are going to be challenges, and we can go, okay, here's another challenge. How can I deal with this in the best way possible? So that's the first thing that will be in the container is challenges. The other thing that without any question will be within the container is opportunities. And there will be huge opportunities on all sorts of levels, especially on personal levels. And there's no doubt a lot of people are seeing them, that the spending time with family is absolutely an opportunity that many of us don't get. But interestingly, it's also a challenge for many of us. And so the opportunities and the challenges will come at similar times. There are opportunities for us to do things that we normally wouldn't do. There are opportunities for us to practice things at home, or to create things, or build things, or tidy things, or read things, or draw things, or anything like that. So there are multiple opportunities that can be created. Now, one of the issues that we have going on is that normally, either in the container or around the container and supporting us during a rite of passage would also be elders or facilitators who were experienced in this idea of a rite of passage, and who would be able to actually guide us so that in the best way possible, we could move through this rite of passage. Now, I'm going to put myself out there and say we are struggling for elders in this period. And there are very few people who really know how to take either individuals or communities, or in fact, the entire population through a rite of passage. So all of us need to look at how can we become and guide as elders in the best way possible people through these rites of passage. And my work for the last 25 years has been around studying the elements of a rite of passage and finding ways that we can guide people through. And what we discovered is that there were always the same things created within a rite of passage, and that within the container, there were the same elements that happened. And the first thing that happened, and that elders always created, was an opportunity for the sharing of stories. So interestingly, stories were an incredibly important part of any rite of passage. And stories, and we'll move to the next slide if we can, stories were seen as a critical element in setting up the container, in setting up the process for the rite of passage, for the transformation to happen in the most positive way that it could. And stories were used in a number of different ways and for a number of different reasons. And the first reason that stories were used, and I have to make sure I get the order right of what I've written here. So if we could go to the next slide, please. The first reason was to strengthen relationships. So I would really encourage you, whoever you're with in the house, whether it's your children or your partners or other members of the family, is to share stories about times in your life, and to share real stories, and to share vulnerable stories, and to do it in a safe way where you agree that they're confidential. But there's no doubt that the sharing of stories and will strengthen relationships, and they are a fantastic way of creating even stronger bonds with your children. I'm just going to take a moment here to let you know that where I am, it started raining. I'm inside, so that's okay, but if you hear a bit of background noise, it'll be rain. And given that we live in northern New South Wales, we could get some torrential rain, but hopefully that won't happen and you'll be able to keep hearing me okay. So stories have been used for thousands of years as a way of strengthening relationships. The next reason why stories have been used is to build communities. When people share stories and when we know other people's stories, we actually build communities and our communities get stronger. And then the third reason why stories have been used is to pass on wisdom and knowledge. So with our children, rather than telling them how to live their lives and what to do, if we can share our stories with them, it's a fantastic way for them to learn about us, for them to learn about their ancestors and their relatives, for them to learn about all sorts of things. So on many levels, I would hugely encourage you to share stories. And I really want you to know that in rites of passage that have been created all over the world, stories were always seen as a critically important element for building the right environment within the container. And there were two types of stories that were told. One, sort of like factual stories. So my mother, who was a fantastic storyteller, would tell us stories about when she was young. She told me stories about my grandfather, who actually used to go around to he was a wool classer. So in the shearing community, in the farms where they would shear the sheep, his job was to go around and check the wool and see what quality it was. And my mother would go in the truck with him sometimes. They were her fondest memories. And she would share stories about sitting next to him in the truck, and they had no safety belts in those days. And they would go around to the communities, and the farmers loved my grandfather. He would always give them a fair price. And it was one of her most proud stories to share with me. So I learned a lot about my family and my relatives through those sorts of stories. And then there are stories that are told that are what we call myths or fables, but that have in them important messages. So I'll just briefly share with you a very old and very well-known famous story, which is an old Cherokee story, a Native American Indian story, where a grandfather is talking to his grandchild and he's telling the story of the two wolves. When this grandfather tells his grandchild that inside him, he has two wolves, and one of these wolves is evil. And that evil represents his anger and his jealousy and his resentment and his sorrow and his, all the things that he really struggles with. So there's one wolf that represents that. And then he has another wolf within him, and that other wolf within him represents the beautiful side of his personality. That represents his loving, his kindness, his humbleness, his thoughtfulness, his creativity. And these two wolves are fighting with each other. And the grandchild is sitting there listening to his grandfather telling him about these two wolves inside him who are fighting. And he says to his grandfather, "Grandfather, which one of these wolves wins?" And the grandfather says to his grandchild, "The wolf that wins is the one that I feed." And it's a very famous story. And what he's saying is that, I will always have these two wolves inside me. I'll always have this dark side. I'll always have this side that struggles and, has all the things that come with struggle. But I'll also have this wolf that's got a light side and has the beauty of me in it. And whichever one I feed that's the wolf that's going to come out. That's the wolf that's going to win. And it's an ongoing thing for me. And what it actually means is I can take responsibility for my life. And if I can look for and feed the light wolf in me, then they are the things that will come out. And if I look for and feed the negative and that other side, then that's what's going to come out. And that story has been told for thousands of years and for thousands of generations to young Cherokee children as a way of passing on the wisdom and knowledge that we have choice around how we choose to be. And I think it's also a very relevant story for what's happening at the moment with our whole pandemic, where, yes, there are challenges and great worries, and there are things that will be difficult, and there will be hard times, but there are also great opportunities. And if we can feed the wolf that looks for the opportunities and tries to see how we can bring out the positive in this pandemic, then that's actually more of what's going to come out, as opposed to if we look for the difficulties. So that's the story of the two wolves and the one that I feed. Saxon, I might ask you if you could put some more wood on the fire so we get a brighter fire. That would be fantastic. Okay, so if we come back to our slides and this idea of the elders, and that it's a way of building community and strengthening relationships and passing on wisdom and knowledge, and all of that sets us up well for the elements that are going to happen within a rite of passage. So I would really encourage you at home to be sharing stories, both the stories of your family, and if there are myths and fables that you know, if you share them and then talk about it with your children and with each other around what you think these stories might mean. Here in the house, we're actually reading together the story of Iron John that was written by Robert Bly. Well, the actual story was written hundreds of years ago, but Robert Bly tells the story of Iron John and does an interpretation of it. And it's a wonderful story, and all of us adults, we read a chapter at a time, and then we analyze it and talk about it and see how it relates to our lives, and it's very, very powerful. Okay, so I want to give you some tips now as we're coming up to the school holidays, you know, we need to think about how we're going to manage that. Many of us will have some days off and our children will no longer be at school, and I have a couple of suggestions for you. The first is to do, and it's something we're going to do here at home, is a reset. And by that I mean, you know, we've been going along for a week, 10 days, and you know, we made some agreements at the beginning. We're going to review those agreements, and we're going to look at how we're doing with them, and we're going to see whether there are other things that we could be doing that would make the way we're living together better and really help us. So I would really recommend, if you can get the family together, have one of your golden check-ins and go, all right, let's just talk about how we think we're going. How are we going as a family? And are there things that we would like to be doing more of? Are there things that we could be doing better? That would be, I believe, a really positive and powerful exercise for all of you to do. And then another thing that we're going to do here that I would highly recommend is do some brainstorming about how you want to spend the days over the Easter break and over the holidays. You know, how can you still do something really positive, but within the confines of isolation and social distancing or quarantine or whatever it is. So, you know, you might decide to have a movie night and make some popcorn and, you know, make like you're going to the pictures, or your children may have a tent and you may like to set it up inside the lounge room and sleep in the tent or in the backyard, or you may create some games, or you may read a book together. But you know, a fantastic thing to do is with the family, say, all right, we're going to have some days off. Let's get some ideas, and really listen to the children. Really listen to what their ideas are and what are some of the things that they would like to do. It's very special if you can give them that opportunity to come out with their ideas and then sort of just run with it a little bit. And you may be really surprised in a very pleasant way about what they come out with. The next thing I just want to mention is that there are some things that we've been seeing in the community, or I've been seeing, that are going on, and I want to speak to those. And the first is the thing that I mentioned at the beginning, is that, you know, people have been here especially in Australia, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe less, and they're struggling. And, you know, it does look like we've got a considerable period to go. This is the beginning. And so, as I said, having a reset, but not only for the family, for ourselves. You know, what are the important things if we want to do this as well as we can? Do we want to exercise? Do we want to eat well? How much alcohol do we actually want to drink? How much time do we want to spend watching Netflix? You know, what are the good things that we could be doing for ourselves? I made a commitment at the beginning of this time that I was going to play a lot of music. I've played hardly any music, but part of my reset will be, I'm going to play music. You know, what are the things that we could be doing for ourselves and also with our children that would be really good and really healthy for us to do? And that will really help with this thing of, you know, okay, we're a week in and we're struggling. Well, how do we take responsibility for that and actually turn it around ourselves? Because if we don't, it could get really ugly. I need to say that. And the other thing that's happening is, and I'm hearing this a lot and we're experiencing it ourselves, you know, it's coming closer. My sister-in-law, who lives in London, has been diagnosed with coronavirus. And, you know, fortunately, she's recovering well, but, you know, we now have some distant relatives who are not well. And some of our friends have, you know, lost parents. So it's like, it was way out here and it's coming closer. And for some of you, it will be even a lot closer than that. So we need to just be giving some time to that and accepting that this is very serious, and how can we manage that, and how can we support our loved ones and our relatives who their loved ones and relatives are in a very difficult situation, and how can we create a support network within our families and our community circles to work with what's going on, because, you know, as we know, this is a very difficult time. All right, and then the final thing that I want to talk about before I open up for some questions is some of the things that we have that we can offer you from the Rites of Passage Institute. In the first week, we put up my ebook, The Making of Men, which you can download as a free copy. That will be available still on our. We'll send you out a follow-up email if you've registered with us, or if you email us at the info at ritesofpassageinstitute.org. We'll send you the links for that. There'll also be a link to my Parenting Teenagers ebook, which you can download free. The other thing that we're offering this week free is I wrote this teen tracker some time ago. And what it is it's 5 questions that you answer about your teenager, and they get a score of 0, 1, or 2. And if they score 8 to 10, they're doing really well. If they score 4 to 7, which is what most teenagers do, they're in an in-between place where it could go either way, and we really need to be aware of that. And if it's 1, 2, or 3, we really need to be taking seriously what's going on. So there are 5 simple questions about how well they communicate and how they're going in the family, how they physically they are different things. It's been very well received in the past, so that'll be on there. And if you want to fill that out, it only takes a few minutes. And yes, it's called a teen tracker, but you can also use it with your younger children, and it's a very valuable tool for just assessing and checking in on, you know, how you think they're going. And then the final thing is, we at the Rites of Passage Institute created this 7-part e-course, online course for parents and children growing together. It's 7 modules, and we've really tried to keep the price as low as we can so that we can make it widely accessible. And it takes you through a series of activities Each day we'll send you out some videos and some worksheets, and we teach you how to really be able to check in well and monitor the well-being of everyone in the house. We take you through various story scenarios. We work with you around how you can manage challenges that are going on within that family and how to creatively deal with those. We talk about how to create a vision for your time together at home and also when you leave, and about recognizing the gifts and talents, the genius and the spirit of everyone in the house. So it follows our rite of passage framework that's been hugely successful, and over 200,000 people in more than 25 countries around the world have taken part in that. And the course will probably take you anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour today. Sorry, 40 minutes to an hour a day. When you do it, you can do it at your own time. People have loved it. The feedback we're getting is they've loved the structure and the way of working with their children. Fantastic thing to do over the holidays. So please check that out. And I hope that you get a lot of value out of that. So we've got a few minutes left. If anybody has a question, I know there was a question about how we motivate our children to do their online learning. Look, and I have to say, and I've said it before, it's a difficult time. School for many of these children is something that they struggle with anyway because of the relevance to them, and then they come home and they're supposed to be doing it at home, and you know, you may not get a tremendous uptake from your children of the online learning, and really if they don't want to do it, it's going to be difficult. And so spending all your time chasing them to try and do it is going to get very frustrating. And I think at some stage you need to say to them, you know, and especially if they're a bit older, you know, you need to look at whether you want to do it and why you would want to do it, and hopefully to be able to think about and, you know, maybe have a discussion around, you know, what do you want to do in the future, and is school going to be of benefit to that, and, you know, can you see reasons why it would be important to do school or not? And at the end of the day, like many other things in your life, you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. And I know that's probably not an ideal answer for everybody, but I believe that the opportunities to learn resilience and adaptability and to really build within the family are very important at the moment. And the online, it's going to be for some children a challenge, or others children who'll do it very well, but hopefully they can, you know, the motivation can come from them. Okay, we've got a question around tips for books containing native stories from Indigenous communities that we can share with our children. Well, I used to love fairy tales and stories when I was younger. So the Grimm fairy tales are some very beautiful stories that have some deep messages within them. And I think if you Google, you know, myths and stories with meaning and messages in them, there are actually some fantastic resources out there that you could use. And, you know, I guess there's different ones for children and there are different ones for adults. And someone's written to me, the Norse myths, N-O-R-S-E. Thanks, Joshua. So the Norse myths are a good source of that. Okay, another question, advice or support you have for a child of 11 being at home on their own while their parent is at work. Yes, and so obviously this is going to be a challenge for children at home on their own. Fortunately, there are some great online resources for children now. There is a great opportunity for them to communicate with other family members and friends through video conferencing and things. But I think the main thing I will do with an 11-year-old is sit down and have a discussion with them around how they could best spend the day, and make a plan together the night before, the day before, and then the next day come home and talk with them about what they did and whether they did what they said they were going to do or not, and see if you can work out why and how you could improve it. And maybe within that, work out a check-in system where you can ring them at certain times or text them or communicate with them so that, you know, you can actually support in whatever way you can for them to be able to do it. So hopefully you can support them with that. And, you know, it's interesting that that will be a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity for them to step up and grow. But if you can support them by doing the plan, I think that will help greatly. I can't see any more questions coming through at this stage, but we often get questions later. So we can collect them up. And if we have an opportunity to do them, we've got a Facebook group that we're starting, the Rites of Passage community on Facebook, and we'd love you to join that, and we'll put whatever resources we can, and we'd love you to join in with discussions and put resources and things of interest on that page. That would be fantastic. The e-course you can find at if you come to our website, homepage, the ritesofpassageinstitute.org, or you can put in learn.ritesofpassageinstitute.org, and the teen tracker we'll have in our email we'll send out, but also is ritesofpassage.org/teen tracker. So hopefully you guys will take advantage of that. This will probably be our last formal webinar. We're going to move to Facebook Live and Instagram Live. The advice we've been given is that that is the best way for communicating at the moment and the way that we can get to the most people. So I look forward to doing many more presentations in various formats and getting them out there. And once again, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone for joining in tonight. Please send in your comments. Hope that's been useful. And until next time, let's do this well and let's do this together.